Number 10. The Machine. Well, this is technically a big moment and revelation from the Eternals series by Kieran Gillen that precedes the AXE event. Some of you may not have been reading Eternals, so I figured it was still an important one to include here because it's really relevant and really cool. But also, go read the latest Eternals series because it is amazing, and honestly it's too short-lived for how awesome it was. You should go read it. I wish Kieran Gillen could just keep writing Eternals for, I don't know, into the foreseeable future. But I gotta say, I am happy that we have him on Immortal X-Men, and you know, if we gotta have one or the other, I get it, but Eternals was so good. In Eternals, we learned about how the Machine actually has its own personality and its own voice. The Machine being the thing that actually resurrects the Eternals every time they die. And honestly, I think it has become one of my favorite characters in the Eternals series. Machine is so cool and so sassy sometimes. In AXE, the Machine serves as a kind of narrator at times, which is also really fun and super cool. Honestly, you could just read this event just for that narration and likely be pretty content with it. That's how good the narration is. While Neil Gaiman and John Romita Jr. actually created the Machine in Volume 3 of the Eternals, Gillen actually helped give it an amazing voice and characterization in his 5th volume of that series. Number 9. Eternals vs. Mutants. This really isn't just about Eternals even versus X-Men. This conflict extends way beyond that, as we learn in AXE Eve of Judgment issue number 1. Here it's revealed that Prime Eternal Druig has an agenda against all mutants. It turns out he wants to kill them all. Why? Well, because he claims the mutants are actually deviants. That is, that they have grown to reach beyond what they should. They have deviated excessively, which is, after all, what Eternals are meant to fight against as one of their own prime directives. Druig, however, doesn't really care as much about killing mutants, deviants, as he does about cementing his own position as Eternal Prime. The Machine was really hoping that Druig would be content to have simply achieved this title, which happened, by the way, in the Eternal series. If you're wondering where you can find that story, like I said, you should read it. But alas, Druig is too paranoid to feel secure and content and wants some accolades to add to his name, so he can be like the greatest Prime Eternal ever, which he could get if he destroyed the mutants in the name of what the Eternals are meant to stand for, eliminating deviants. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, you should go check out our new channel, Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. It is really cool, and we want you to go and give all the anime manga love that you have over to the channel. And over to James. Say hi to James while you're over there. Number 8. The Secret of the Eternals' Resurrection. This is another thing that, like the Machine's quirky personality, was actually covered in the Eternals series. However, for those of you who haven't gotten there yet, this is also covered in Judgment Day, more specifically being recapped in AXE Eve of Judgment, so you can, be in on the secret, because it's pretty integral to what's happening here with the Eternals. And so for some, this is probably a pretty big revelation because, like I said, I don't think everyone that's reading this event has read Eternals. What we learn here is that the Machine actually resurrects mutants by sacrificing a human life from Earth to do so. This is the reason that Phastos is actually imprisoned, kinda. He attempted to destroy the Machine upon learning of this revelation, but he didn't realize that the Machine is actually intrinsically tied to the Earth. In fact, it is the Earth. So destroying the Machine actually means destroying the world. But initially, Phastos thought it would actually be a solution for Eternals' immortality and actually save a ton of human lives that would, be sacrificed to resurrect Eternals whenever they fell. Ikaris also must live with this revelation, as must the rest of the Eternals, and for Ikaris it's especially difficult as his interpretation of one of their prime directives to protect the Machine was that this also meant protecting the humans of Earth. So you can see his contradictory dilemma, because to keep the Machine going means you're gonna have to kill some humans. It's not great. Number 7. Forge multitasks. I love Forge so much, and I love this new X-Men team we've gotten out of the last election at the Hellfire Gala. It is so awesome. It's just like, the more I think about this team, the more I'm like, this is actually like a really cool team. This is the moment that has me itching to read more of this team together though, despite the fact that I believe, sadly, Jerry Dugan is actually going to be leaving this book. In issue number 13 of the X-Men, which is still written by Dugan at this point, we get a look into how the Eternals attacked Krakoa and attempted to defeat the Mutant Island. The Eternals sick giant kaiju-like beings on Krakoa, also Eternals themselves. These giant Eternals are known as the Hex, that's that's the name of their subgroup. The Hex attack Krakoa, and Forge is not even intimidated into donning battle armor in response. That's just so Forge. Instead, he brings out the big guns and he waits for the right moment to strike while lounging in tropical attire and sipping a drink out of a pineapple. It's a fantastic moment that feels super Forge. Forge successfully takes out one of the giant Eternals that looks like a dragon. Unfortunately, he does only have one magic nanite bullet, and you know, that was it. So the X-Men are gonna have to figure out what to do about the rest of the army of Hex who are still headed towards the island. Number 6. Ikaris makes a deal. But not just any deal. Ikaris talks to Jean Grey, and in so doing decides that he will help Jean with Druig's invasion of Krakoa. To defeat the Hex, the mutants must venture to where they're being transported to Earth from, but there are a few problems. 1. Only Eternals can actually enter that area, and 2. Uranos, one of the most deadly Eternals, is currently there, surrounded by an armory of endless weapons. So yeah, might be kinda tricky for even someone as powerful as Jean to deal with that and get out alive. Oh, and while Ikaris is willing to help, the deal only stands for him to get the mutants in there even, who need to be ready at a moment's notice to go with him, if Jean can ensure that no Eternals are killed. In typical Ikaris fashion, being extremely just to a fault, especially with the revelation about the machine plaguing his conscience. If any Eternals are killed, the deal will be off. Number 5. The Spider-Men meet. For many years, Marvel did their best to keep Ultimate completely separate from Earth 616, but eventually, the inevitable crossover between the worlds had to happen. We all knew eventually it would come around. The really cool thing about this though, it brought together Earth 616 Spider-Man Peter Parker with Miles Morales' Spider-Man from Earth 1610. Not only that, but Peter would also get to learn about his own seemingly unfortunate fate in this reality and cross paths once more with a living Gwen Stacy, who in the Ultimate Universe dies but is reborn again thanks to the lab-created being which killed her in the first place, Carnage. And for a time she even gets to be Carnage, which I thought was pretty cool. Short-lived though. Number 4. Colossus' secret. Colossus and Kitty don't end up together like how they do in the main continuity. Instead, Colossus is revealed to have a secret here when it comes to his sexual identity. Turns out the Colossus vs 1610 is actually gay. The challenge of him living as a closeted gay man makes him an even more interesting character in the Ultimate Universe, adding another layer of what it can be like to feel other, in addition to Colossus already being a mutant, so that's a huge part of his backstory as well. Colossus does get outed, but considering how masculine of a character he is, and you know, how burly, he also provides a more diverse look when it comes to how gay men are usually depicted in mainstream comics. There are some that are burly, but definitely not enough. I feel like we need to diversify that a little bit. Number 3. Kitty Pryde leads the X-Men. I am a big Kitty Pryde fan, as you may have garnered from all my time spent hyping the current heroic Marauders mutant team, and Kate's place as their leader. Not to mention her new look as well. I am here for it. When it comes to Ultimate, she's another character who does not disappoint us. Even after her teenage years, which were pretty fun with her dating and fighting crime alongside Spider-Man, which we talked about earlier, Kitty becomes somehow even cooler and definitely a lot tougher. After the devastating and earth-shattering events of Ultimatum, Kitty would go on to become the leader of the surviving mutant nation and the leader of the X-Men team besides. At least the X-Men who choose to stay with her and follow her as a leader. Of which, were I an Ultimate Universe mutant, I would be one of. I would be here to join Kitty's team. Definitely. For sure. Let's also acknowledge that Kitty becomes the leader after she has lost almost everything in the wake of Ultimatum, losing many friends and loved ones who were closest to her. Kitty is strong. Number 2. The creation of the Maker. One of my all-time favorite characters that we've gotten from the Ultimate Universe has to be the Maker. The Maker is one of the best villains within and without Earth 1610, as he happens to be one of the few characters who made the move over from 1610 to Earth 616 after that universe was seemingly destroyed. That's how you know he's cool. Although don't worry, the Maker does appear to be working to restore the Ultimate Universe and has since brought that world back. What's even more wild is that initially the Maker was none other than hero and leader of the Fantastic Four, Reed Richards, proving just how rewarding and refreshing it can be to try something totally different with an established and widely predictable character. Also, I feel like I like Reed better as a villain. I feel like I like his Ultimate Universe counterpart better. Is that a hot take? I don't know. I don't think so. I think a lot of people feel this way. Number 1. Miles Morales Unmasks. One of the greatest characters we've gotten out of the Ultimate Universe, other than the Maker obviously, has to be Miles Morales. He also happens to be one of the few characters who has stood the test of time when it comes to surviving the destruction of his home universe, reality of Earth 1610. Instead of dying with many of the other residents of the Ultimate Universe, Miles ended up being saved and even returned once more on Earth 616, where he was permanently moved to after the events of Secret Wars. I mean, come on. You know you're cool when you get moved from an alternate reality to the main one, just to save you and your family. Miles unmasking was a huge moment for Marvel as they introduced us to a biracial Spider-Man who is not only a stand-up hero, but is also just a really solid character all of his own, as opposed to being a carbon copy of Peter Parker's Spider-Man, which I feel like there's gonna be some people in the comments who are gonna be like, I think he is a carbon copy, but I really don't think he is. I think Miles has a lot of different stuff going on. It's definitely not usually as negative as Peter. No offense, Peter, still love you.
And at number 10, organic webs. Tobey Maguire's iteration of Spider-Man was extremely accurate to the comic source material, but one of the few differences between the two was his version of Spider-Man's web shooters. For most of Spider-Man's nearly 60 years of existence in comic books and various adaptations, the superhero used a pair of wrist-mounted shooters that shoot a synthetic web-like fluid. While most Spider-Man adaptations retain the iconic mechanical web shooters, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy opted to give its version of Peter Parker the power to generate webbing from his body. When you really think about it, it is really gross. It was even a joke made in the latest Spider-Man movie when the Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland versions of the characters are flabbergasted and slightly grossed out by Tobey Maguire's organic sticky spider webbing that came propelling out of this weird scar on his wrist. Maybe I'm weird, but I kinda like the organic webbing? I don't know, maybe because I grew up on the Raimi films, it felt right, and the reason for Raimi doing it makes sense to me. I'm sorry.
Number 9, from rags to riches and back to rags again. One of the weirdest things that happened to Peter in regards to no one seemingly really acknowledging or remembering it much in the continuity is when Peter became basically a globe-trotting billionaire all his own, in a similar but distinctly different style to Iron Man's Tony Stark. Well, of course, initially it was Otto in Peter's body who created Parker Industries and made it a success, but still, even without Otto in the driver's seat, it makes sense when you think about it, as Peter is a brilliant man who, if he had the time and he put in the effort, could easily end up near the top of the Fortune 500. However, what is weird is that he created a global company that was extremely profitable and successful for a time, lost it, and then everyone seemingly forgot who he was. He ended up back as just poor Peter Parker, just trying to get by while playing the role of hero. And everyday folks don't seem to even recognize him as the face of a once great global company. That's pretty nuts.
Number 8. Getting beat up by the Spot. Jonathan Owen is a villain that only well-versed fans of Spider-Man would recognize, probably. As the Spot, Jonathan hasn't always been the most relevant villain of Peter Parker. He often ends up on the list of Spider-Man's worst and unknown villains. I mean, when he first confronted Spider-Man and announced his villain moniker in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 99 in 1985, the hero hit the ground laughing, which made it all the more embarrassing for Spider-Man when the Spot actually defeated him. Spot threw Peter in and out of his dimensions using his whole portals. He landed more than a few good punches on the hero as well. The Spot doesn't hit hard, but as he says, even the strongest of trees can be felled by sufficient strokes from even the smallest of hatchets. Yeah, he said that. Eventually he left Peter discombobulated, with Black Cat having to help him back to his feet, and he got his own back eventually, but that's not important.
Number 7. Everyone loves MJ. An awkward moment in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe comes courtesy of Ultimate Peter Parker getting his own version of the Clone Saga. Except here, instead of Ben Reilly and Kane Parker, we got Kane Parker and Jessica Drew. That's right, in the Ultimate universe, Jessica Drew is actually a female clone of Peter Parker. There were some other clones too, just for those of you that are like, you didn't mention all the other clones. But yes, I know about them. They exist. And even more intriguing and also kind of sad in this reality, Jessica and all the other clones have all of Peter's memories, which leads to pretty much all of them having a huge crush on MJ. Jessica included. Although in an even stranger twist, despite also being in love with Mary Jane, or seemingly being in love with Mary Jane, instead of Jessica ending up as a lesbian in this portrayal of her character as a result of sharing Peter's memories and feelings, it is implied that she actually ends up dating Johnny Storm, albeit possibly briefly. Although I think that also could say something about the potential for the close relationship that Johnny and Peter have in the comics, so Maybe that's what that's about.
Number 6. Spider-Man and Silk getting busy on the ceiling. Cindy Moon, first revealed in the Amazing Spider-Man #1 from 2014, was a girl who on the same day was also bitten by the exact same spider that gave Peter Parker his powers. Now fast forward to the 4th issue of that comic and Peter learns of her existence and the place she was being kept safe. He releases her and joins her as she goes off into the world. Now it took about 5 or 6 pages before it was revealed that these two young spider heroes release pheromones that make them irresistibly attracted to one another, and they nearly immediately start going at it. Mid-argument. They go at it so much so that it carries on into the next issue when he and Cindy Moon are on the ceiling of the apartment that Peter shares with his roommate Anna Maria Marconi. So of course Anna Maria walks in on the two spider freaks sparsely clothed and unable to control themselves. Not an ideal situation.
Number 5. The 5 are broken. Wow, I didn't even intend to put the 5 at 5, but here we are. When Krakoa is attacked, Jack of Knives is also deployed to kill as many as he can and of course get the 5, who Prime Eternal Druig knows about from his alliance with Orcus. The shocking part is that they actually succeed in this. Egg falls and is unable to be protected during this attack. The good news is Egg had made some extra eggs before he died, meaning that the 5, even without one of their key members, was able to actually bring him back to life, thank goodness. But for a moment the 5 were broken, and for a few moments upon reading Judgment Day issue #1, you likely were like me and you lived in fear that the resurrection days of Krakoa were over. It was a really close one there for a second. Number 4. Isca the Unbeaten changes sides. In X-Men Red issue #5, we learn of what happens to Arakko. This issue, by the way, is crazy, it's so good. We know from the main Judgment Day series that Arakko was attacked by Uranos, and presumably hit pretty hard by them. And if you're thinking, I mean, it's Arakko, how bad can it be? The answer is really freaking bad. Uranos is released from his cell by Druig for exactly 1 hour. Within 20 minutes, he had already put a huge dent in Arakko. Isca herself during the hour is forced to change sides due to her mutant power, which isn't a good sign. Isca's power, for those that don't know, is that she'll always win, but this means that her power has told her that Arakko winning is not possible if she's turning on them. So that's a really bad sign. Good for Isca though, because she actually does win, she survives, she gets to live another day, with Nightcrawler teleporting her away to help Arakko's odds after she turns on them. Nightcrawler's solution is basically like, well, if Isca isn't here, then her power can't like affect the outcome. You know what I mean? Bad for Arakko, as they now have to face Uranos without either Isca or Nightcrawler, and Isca also ended up breaking the Great Ring of Arakko when she killed Idil, one of her fellow council members. The really bad part with all of this though is that Uranos is successful and kills almost everyone on Arakko. And Arakko in X-Men Red was revealed to not believe in resurrection. So they have rejected that Krakoan gift, and as such all of those who died will basically never come back to us. At least these mutants aren't going to come back from mutant resurrection protocols. Number 3. Heartless Magneto. Magneto was killed during the events of X-Men Red issue #5. He puts up a good fight, but in the end Uranos wins, getting him right in the heart. But here's the thing about Arakko. As we learn in that issue, you should always confirm the kill when you're dealing with anybody from Arakko. These are hard mutants cut from a different cloth, and so it is no surprise that other than Isca, a few people are going to survive the brutality of this, especially as Uranos only has a limited time on the planet and foolishly does not confirm each and every kill, which, you know, he probably should have done that. A few do survive, including Xylo and Lotus Logos of the Great Ring, and of course Magneto. Magneto may have been punched through the heart and no longer have one, but he has his powers and iron in his blood, and that is enough for him to basically will his blood to keep moving through his body, using the iron to kind of create, I don't know, like it's like a glowing orb, but to me I kind of think of it as like an engine that'll replace his heart. Of course he'd probably have to keep thinking about it because he'd be using his power to move the blood. Magneto is just always being a badass is basically the moral of the story, and it's so cool. It's so cool to read. Number 2. Recipe for a God. One group of the Eternal Eternals has a plan to defeat Druig by creating a god. They kidnap evil geneticist Mr. Sinister, who currently is a little less evil, working with the mutants instead of against them, of course, on Krakoa. With his and the Avengers' help, using their headquarters, which is the body of a dead Celestial, they set out to make their plan happen. The good news is they succeed, rewriting the programming of the Celestial to make it more aligned with their own beliefs and principles when it awakens. The bad news is the progenitor, which is the name of the Celestial, comes back to life only to inform our heroes that in 24 hours everyone on Earth will also be judged, as they feel those living there have caused so much harm that they too should perhaps be destroyed. They have till then to convince the progenitor that their first impression of Earth and of everyone on it is incorrect. Number 1. Mutants equals deviants? So the funny thing is that Druig, while sort of fabricating a connection between deviants and mutants with dramatic interpretation of excess deviation, actually may have been onto something. When the Celestial comes online and threatens the world, the Quiet Council must decide what to do and possibly take action. However, as they are talking about using some potential secret weapons, Emma Frost reveals she has one of her own. She has made an alliance with the Deviants, who head to Krakoa to help in the fight against the Eternals. The hilarious and amazing part is when Crow reveals to Cyclops that Deviants can use mutant gates, likely thanks to their genetics being so similar to mutants. So perhaps mutants are deviants after all.
Number 10. Black Widow and Iron Man. A change in the Ultimate Universe that actually made sense in my head for some reason was the relationship between Tony Stark and Black Widow. Shortly after Iron Man joined the S.H.I.E.L.D.-sponsored Ultimates team, he and Natalia Romanova struck up their relationship, and it went so far the two eventually got engaged, with Tony even giving Black Widow her own nanite-controlled suit of armor, which did look really cool by the way. But the happy couple didn't last too long, as it turned out that Natalia was actually a traitor, working for the Liberators, which is a whole other thing we could talk about. After she turned on Tony, she managed to end the life of his longtime butler and close friend Jarvis. Kind of an unredeemable act there. So it didn't feel so bad when Tony used the nanites inside Natalia's body, the ones used to control that fancy new armor, to paralyze her and steal information from her brain about the Liberators and her betrayal. And then he knocks her unconscious with a wine bottle, giving her brain damage. There was also this whole raunchy video that got leaked of the two, which just felt completely random to me, but hey, it happens. Number 9. Black Panther. A lot of stuff in the Ultimate Universe I can look past, but I gotta say I don't like what they did to Black Panther here. You see, in the Ultimate Universe, T'Challa Udaku, the youngest son of King T'Chaka, when he became jealous of his older brother M'Baku, who was set to take on the Panther Trials, T'Challa decided to secretly go do it himself. What are the Panther Trials? Well, it basically involves hunting and defeating an actual panther in combat. So yeah, the young T'Challa ain't ready for that kind of thing, and he loses badly, with the panther actually tearing out T'Challa's throat. Being brought back to Wakanda, he undergoes 16 hours of surgery, and even then, the supposedly super advanced nation is not able to save him. So of course, they turn to the United States of America. Specifically, they turn to the super reliable Weapon X program. Now, Weapon X is able to save T'Challa, minus his vocal cords, but similar to Wolverine, they give him mutant abilities that enhance his strength, speed, stamina, agility, night vision, and they even give him retractable bone claws, and then give him the title of Black Panther. He is then put under the control of Nick Fury, who refuses to let him go back to Wakanda, makes him the property of the United States, and has him trained under Captain America. Now there is more to this story, but taking the awesome culture-rich Wakandan hero and making him a sort of Wolverine clone who can't speak and is the property of the United States government just kind of feels wrong, man. Number 8. Victor Von what? This point is going to cover one very small thing. For the ultimate version of Doctor Doom, I honestly don't have much issue with the changes they implemented. The metal skin, the goat legs, the backstory change, even what they did to his kingdom, it's alright, I guess, for me. One thing I cannot abide is changing his last name to have him seemingly related to a real-world action star. Victor Van Damme? Van Damme? Why? Who do these buffoons think they are? Sorry, I'm getting a little worked up here. He was also way more of a petty character than he was an extremely dangerous villain. Luckily, that changed slightly before the Ultimate run came to an end, but the damage was done. Let's just move on. Number 7. Blue Goo. Maybe this is more just really weird as opposed to a horrible moment, but thanks to sci-fi writer Orson Scott Card of Ender's Game fame, we got a version of Iron Man who, due to a virus that led to the passing of his mother and affected Tony upon his birth, lives in in constant pain unless he's coated in this really strange blue goo created by his father, which was developed as a sort of bio armor. It does the trick, but it's still rather odd, and fans were not fans of this change. Personally, I think a lot of the changes made to Iron Man's backstory in the Ultimate Universe were really interesting, and it was different from 616, which made it fun, but the blue skin was an interesting choice to say the least. This point is a little unfair as Marvel decided to retcon this out of his history, but that don't change the fact that it did indeed happen, and it was rather strange too. Number 6. Hulk eating people. The Incredible Hulk has always sort of tiptoed the line between being a hero and being a monster. In the 616 universe, we can more often than not say he is a hero, but in the Ultimate Universe, not a chance. For starters, his origin already starts Bruce Banner off on a bad foot. He is made to feel inferior by both his ex and other heroes, which is what spurs him to become the Hulk in order to feel bigger, I guess? Sounds like a supervillain to me. That's because he basically is. After he transforms, he goes on a rampage through New York, taking out more than 800 people and even eating some of them. Sure, the idea haunts Bruce, which we learn in the Ultimate Hulk solo comic as he recounts the feeling of eating a person, but there isn't really a redemption here. Also, what the hell is up with the whole Freddie Prinze Jr. thing? It's hilarious, but what? Number 5. Fall of Hal Jordan. Sticking with Green Lantern here, written by Ron Mars, the Emerald Twilight storyline did one good thing by giving us Kyle Rayner, but it did an absolutely dastardly thing by turning Hal Jordan into one of the most evil villains we've ever seen. It starts off already on the dark side when Coast City, the home of Hal Jordan, is destroyed. In complete agony over the loss, Hal tries to use his powers to remake the city and all its inhabitants. In his madness though, he goes and takes out every single one of the Green Lanterns, stealing their rings in order to try and make the whole thing a permanent stay. Now, if we are going to pick one moment though, for me, the final fight with Sinestro is actually ingrained in my memory as being utterly horrible. There were no catchphrases, no jokes, no nothing, just a gritty whimper of a fight that ended with an incredibly harrowing snap. Number 4. Joker's face. In Detective Comics' Faces of Death and Batman Death of the Family, Joker had his face sliced off by the doll maker when he purposely got captured and sent to Arkham Asylum. Then he left it in his cell as a little gift for Batman and the police after he escaped. He would then go and steal it back and either staple it onto his head or strap it on as a mask, or sometimes he'd even take it off and play peekaboo with it. It's really messed up. Now, the worst use of this would have to either be when he put the youngest Robin, Damian Wayne, with a bunch of dead birds and bugs and stuff and then terrified the Robin using his removed Joker face, or when he captured the entire Bat family and made them all think he had removed their faces as well. Absolutely terrifying. Number 3. The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke is one of DC's most groundbreaking Joker stories, but it is a Joker story, which means it is going to be messed up. In an effort to break Commissioner Gordon to prove his point that all it takes to make someone bad is one bad day, the Joker breaks loose from Arkham Asylum and attacks Barbara Gordon, the Commissioner's daughter, and who also happened to be Batgirl. The attack itself was incredibly visceral and it left Barbara paralyzed, but the worst part came later. When after kidnapping the Commissioner, Joker showed him pictures that he took of Barbara, scantily clad and implying a hell of a lot. While this book was incredible in a lot of ways, the writer, Alan Moore, says that this is one part he kind of regrets, and he places some of the blame on DC editorial, who encouraged and okayed him to go so far. Number 2. Bialya. If we are talking dark moments, there are 2 DC characters that always come to the forefront of my mind. The Joker is obviously one, he's already showed up multiple times on this list, but the other would be Black Adam. Black Adam does not give a damn. The only things he has shown to care about are him, his family, and his country. He has ripped someone in half as a warning to not mess with Kahndaq, he has obliterated Psycho Pirate's face for manipulating his mind, and he took on the entire superhuman community in the World War III event. But the whole catalyst for that last one was because he completely decimated the entire innocent population of the country of Bialya, and all because a group of villains had taken his family from him and he could not find them. It was only when he decided to try and head to another country that the World War III events started. And in at number 1, 1 is Dr. Light. Okay, this one is kind of really hard to talk about. We are dealing with really mature subject matter, and it was handled in an incredibly bad way that led to absolutely nothing worth it. I'd give you a trigger warning, but I can't even say some of the worst things that happen in this story. Just know that if you choose to read Identity Crisis and the stories in relation to it, you've been warned. Sue Dibney is the wife of Ralph Dibney, the elongated man in DC Comics, and after her incredibly horrific passing, Dr. Light is accused of the crime. This is because it's revealed that Light had, to put it the only way I'm allowed to, attacked Sue in the past. The fact that he did this led the Justice League to okay Zatanna using her magic to give Light a mental lobotomy that wiped his mind and left him basically stupid. Batman discovered this, and then they did the same thing to him so that Superman would not find out. The whole thing led to nothing, and it was incredibly unnecessary. Coming in at number 10 is Adrian Toomes. Kicking off this list on the very mild end, we gotta start with the MCU, because as most of you know, the film and television versions of Marvel's universe have never and likely will never go to the dark depths that their comic counterparts will. Despite that though, the actors in some of these films can really serve up a small taste of darkness that can put a chill down your spine. For example, in Spider-Man Homecoming, the main antagonist is Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, played extremely and unsurprisingly well by Michael Keaton. In a really unexpected moment, when Peter Parker arrives at his date Liz's house, he is greeted at the door by Adrian, Liz's father. Adrian drives the pair to their dance, and Toomes gradually figures out that Peter Parker is the Spider-Man. At the end of this car ride, Toomes actually pulls a weapon on Peter and very calmly threatens Peter with the end of his life and those he loves if Spider-Man does not back off. It's an incredibly well acted scene and makes you feel just how serious things just got for Peter Parker. Number 9, John Walker. Fast forward a little bit later on in the MCU timeline to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now this is after Steve Rogers has stopped being Captain America. Instead, John Walker has taken up the Captain America mantle on orders from the government. As comic fans know, John Walker is not the greatest guy around, and in the MCU, it's no different. Well, maybe a little bit more restrained. A little. In one of the most shocking and dark scenes from the show, from episode 4, after the Flag Smashers caused the passing of Walker's best friend Lamar, John chases down one of the Flag Smashers, and in front of a crowd of people, he very brutally uses the shield of Captain America to bring the Flag Smasher to an end. The image of the bloody shield of Captain America is such a surprising thing to see, especially out in the MCU, and it's left everyone who saw this scene for the first time slack-jawed and lost for words. Hey guys, if you are enjoying this video so far, make sure you drop a like. One way to let us know that we are doing a good job. We very much appreciate it. Number 8, Brian Banner. Fans of The Incredible Hulk are well aware of how dark and messed up the character's past is. It's a partial reason that Bruce was able to become the Hulk in the first place. A large part of his darker past has to do with Bruce's father, Brian Banner. Brian was a less than ideal father figure. For starters, because of his job researching atomic radiation, he believed that his DNA was altered and that when Bruce was born, he was some kind of monster because of it. Brian also became jealous of how much attention Rebecca Banner gave to baby Bruce. Brian went pretty much insane, in other words. As some of you know, Brian became responsible for the passing of Rebecca Banner. On the anniversary of her funeral, Bruce was visiting her grave, and Brian, recently released from the mental hospital, arrived. But Brian wasn't cured at all. He attacked Bruce, but all the years of torment had built up inside of Bruce, and in one kick, Bruce threw Brian off balance and he fell backwards, hitting his head off of the gravestone of Rebecca Banner and instantly ending his life. This moment was so haunting to Bruce that he just erased it from his own mind, convincing himself for years that his father passed due to a mugging. Number 7, Spider-Man and Mary Jane. Spider-Man is arguably the face of Marvel Comics, and for good reason too. He's incredibly inspiring, full of hope, and is never one to give up. For all those reasons, when Spider-Man Reign was released in 2007, it was incredibly hard to see an old, tired, and torn down Peter Parker who had pretty much given up. Of all the dark and depressing things in this story, there is one thing that stands above the rest. So, through the course of the story, we learn that Mary Jane, Peter Parker's greatest love interest, has passed away, and he's been hanging on to this memory of her, and that's likely due to the fact that he is directly responsible. Mary Jane didn't pass away because of a villain or Peter failing to save her. Instead, because of the radioactive spider that gave him his abilities, Peter himself was radioactive. Through the years and years that Peter Parker and Mary Jane had been together, Peter's radioactive body had essentially given Mary Jane cancer. We learn this as Peter is hugging her decaying body and bawling his eyes out. It's honestly utterly gut-wrenching. Number 6. Green Goblin and Gwen Stacy. Sticking with Spider-Man, because apparently putting Spider-Man through the ringer is Marvel's speciality, we have Sins Past. In this story, it was revealed that Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, who was a full-grown man at the time, had actually had an affair with the teenage Spider-Man's other love interest, Gwen Stacy. Not only that, but Norman actually knocked her up with twins. Norman whisked Gwen off to France so that she could give birth, but filled with guilt, Gwen decided to come clean and tell Peter Parker everything. But Norman was absolutely not going to allow that to happen, which was the reason that the Green Goblin, who had barely ever shared any comic time with Gwen Stacy before this point, chose to infamously put her life in peril, and it's the whole reason she lost her life in the first place. It's incredibly unnecessary and completely tears down the memory of Gwen. Number 5. Wolverine. Why are you so weird? Look, I'm gonna get into all the weirdness that is the Ultimate Universe Wolverine in a sec, but one thing that kind of immediately sticks out is how this version of Wolverine seems to repeatedly swing for ladies that are a little below his age bracket, or like a lot below, and always redheads, which I guess kind of checks out from the 616 version too. Jean Grey, Firestar, and the one we're talking about today, Mary Jane Watson. In Ultimate Spider-Man number 66, Wolverine and Peter Parker end up switching bodies after Wolverine makes some unwanted advances on the teenage Jean Grey, who psychically swapped their bodies. I don't know why she did that, but she did it. Wolverine finds some drawbacks, but apparently they pale in comparison to the perk that is the teenage Peter's girlfriend, Mary Jane. Wolverine tells MJ that he, in Peter's body, doesn't need to go to school, while also making some crude advances towards her as well. It comes off as kinda creepy and really cringy. Number 4. Wolverine. How you die. Now, on the topic of Wolverine, he himself has quite a few moments that make him kinda awesome and some that make him kinda horrible. Ultimate Wolverine is no longer feral, and he does not have the classic healing factor. Instead, he gets the survival factor, which is kind of a heck of a lot better. He can survive a heck of a lot, almost anything. S.H.I.E.L.D. chopped his body off, leaving only his head, and he breathed through his skin. They put his head in a vacuum and he went into stasis. Hulk ripped his body and threw it into another mountain range, and when Wolverine found that half, it was still fresh, no organ failure, no rot, and the blood was somehow still pumping, and he just put himself back together again with no issues. Ultimate Wolverine is unkillable by any means, no matter what you do. It was also implied that Ultimate Wolverine was the precursor of all mutants. He was sort of the first mutant in the world, so all the other mutants are basically products of Weapon X experimentation on Wolverine. On top of that, his blood could be synthesized into a substance that gives mutants insane power boosts. Marvel made Ultimate Wolverine insanely overpowered, and then they absolutely killed him in the stupidest way possible. He died because Magneto did a hand wave thingamajig, as someone on Reddit said, and apparently he destroyed every single one of Wolverine's cells while ripping out his adamantium. Number 3. Is this Game of Thrones? If you haven't noticed by some of the previous points, Marvel did a lot of unnecessary sexualizing of the Ultimate Universe. And to just push it a bit further into unnecessary odd choices made by Marvel for this universe, they included the incestuous relationship between the characters of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Somehow it actually feels worse than the one in Game of Thrones, maybe just because it was extremely shocking and the two characters never had anything even similar to this in the 616 continuity. Fans wondered whether it was really necessary for Mark Millar to pair the two characters together and questioned whether the twist added anything new to the story at all. Answer: it didn't. Probably the biggest issue with this revelation is that now the characters can't so much as look at each other without fans accusing the writers of returning to the incest plot from the Ultimate X-Men. Number 2. Blob. After the events of that Ultimatum thing, which I'm so close to talking about, many heroes were taken out and or unaccounted for. One such hero would be Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. Now, as we know, Hank Pym, Ant-Man, was kind of the worst, and though a terrible husband, he still diligently looked for his missing wife. What he found instead was the villain the Blob feasting on her remains. It's probably one of the most striking images from the whole Ultimate Universe, but it just gets stranger and somehow worse. Enraged at the sight of it, Ant-Man converted to his giant man state and picked up the Blob in his giant hand and bit Blob's head clean off and spat it on the ground to the shock and horror of his teammates. And in at number 1 is Ultimatum. Ultimatum was supposed to be how the writers finished off the Ultimate Universe stories. Obviously it didn't turn out that way, but as you can tell from previous points, writers kinda just went a little haywire with things they would do with a dying universe story. Basically, Magneto, who has been a pretty brutal villain in this universe so far, goes even farther during the mega event where stakes were way high. Basically, after Magneto gains control of the Hammer of Thor and is manipulated by none other than Dr. Doom, he messes with the magnetic pillars of the world, flipping them on their head and sending weather into a frenzy. The big event was a giant tsunami called the Ultimatum Wave that basically put New York underwater and brought a giant casualty list along with it. Bruce Banner drowns, but the Hulk lives, the Wasp gets eaten, as mentioned before, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are killed off. In a bit more of a divisive move, while the X-Men are looking for their fallen teammates in the wake of the tidal wave in New York, Magneto pays a visit to Professor X and in a pretty brutal scene, snaps the professor's neck. Magneto also rips the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton and pretty much disintegrates him like we talked about before.
Number 10. Galactus. The thing to remember about the Ultimate Universe is one of its mission statements was to offer a different look at the Marvel world that was more grounded in reality. Well, there were a few things they were trying to do, but this was one of the things among them. They also wanted the Ultimate Universe to be a stark contrast to the main continuity, and it seemed to favor more of a gritty or edgy take on Marvel canon, and it aimed to eliminate the unapproachable elements of Marvel Comics by making sure stories weren't bogged down by years of established history and continuity for characters and events. Which means that when you go to a comic shop, anyone that walks into that comic shop can pick up an Ultimate comic and be like, I know what's happening. This is easy. When it came to Galactus though, the reason he really had to be changed is because the idea of a cosmic giant with a weird hat who eats worlds in the Ultimate Universe, it's kinda silly. It doesn't feel very grounded in reality, does it? Instead, they turned Galactus into Galactus, a drone army that devours worlds as a massive group of city-sized robots flying around space. Which honestly, it might also be more terrifying than the original version of this character. Galactus has since merged with the original villain of 616, Galactus or Galen, so now it does look like a giant Galen still, which is a little unfortunate, but this also made the entity more powerful between both worlds, so still pretty scary, even though now kind of ruined the whole, getting rid of the silliness look. It's what happens when the Ultimate Universe dissolves and is folded back into sort of the main continuity. Number 9. Sue Storm and Ben Grimm. Sue Storm and Ben Grimm aren't generally the most shipped couple in the Marvel Universe, but that simply might be because Reed Richards is in their way. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, one of the cutest and most endearing relationships is actually the one between the two FF members. Here, Reed still held a flame for Sue, but when he proposed to her following Ultimatum, Sue, instead of accepting like in 616, actually said, nah, I'm gonna pass on that. This was part of what really messed up Reed, but also helped to bring Ben and Sue even closer, allowing a romance between them to blossom. In the Ultimate Universe, Ben and Sue get married and they even have a daughter together. And friends, before we head on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you're loving our content here on Top 10 Nerd, be sure to head on over to Facebook where you can follow us and where we'll have lots of fresh, cool things coming your way soon. So check it out so you're there first. Number 8. Death of Spider-Man. Well, the death of Spider-Man, the first time around, felt a little rough and brutal. When we took a second swing at it with Brian Michael Bendis building the narrative and giving it room to breathe, it actually ended up being one of the most powerful moments within the existence of the Marvel Ultimate Universe. Peter Parker as Spider-Man is a character you never expect to die, which is what makes it so shocking and painful when it happens, and it feels extremely permanent. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your take, we would learn later on that Peter actually was able to survive thanks to his powers' ties to the Oz formula. Still, Peter would basically decide to keep his resurrection and secret immortality a secret, and pass the torch of Spider-Man officially on to Miles Morales, who in the Ultimate Universe, and now also in Earth 616, is also Spider-Man. Number 7. Kitty Pryde and Peter Parker. Kitty Pryde and Peter Parker on paper kinda seem like a weird couple, but in the Ultimate Universe they really worked well together. In fact, I think Peter might actually be one of my favorite picks for Kitty in terms of relationships that we've had so far. Although I'm still holding out for magic. I'm still holding out for Illyana and Kitty to get together. Let's do it. Possibly, I actually like this relationship better than even that of Colossus and Kitty. At least that's my take. That's a very personal opinion, and I'm sure, you know, it's a preference or not for folks. So if you out there are Colossus and Kate shipper, that's fine. You can do that too. Together, the pair not only had fun as teenagers, but they also teamed up to fight crime, which was pretty cool. Sadly, their relationship did not last forever, and the pair did break up after Peter realized that he really wanted to be with Mary Jane instead. Ugh. While he would also seemingly die young, Kitty would still remember him fondly even as she grew up, lingering on what could have been if they had stayed together. Although she'd never confess her thoughts and dreams about their hypothetical life together. She kept those to herself. So sad. Number 6. Thor. Thor is another fascinating take on a character we feel we know so well. Although in the end, Thor did turn out to be Thor Odinson, son of Odin, who was made to forget his true identity on Earth. For a good while, we weren't so sure that was the case. Also, saying Thor Odinson, son of Odin, is such a weird thing to say because you're kind of saying Thor, son of Odin, son of Odin. The reason why we were so eager to believe that, hey, maybe Thor isn't actually Thor, is that the Ultimate Universe was touted and marketed as being a fresh take and less bogged down continuity-wise to that of Earth 616 and their characters. So we were like, hey, maybe they are reinventing this status quo. Thor initially appeared to be a delusional man who believed he was Thor, but was kinda like out of his mind. For his power, he heavily relied on weaponry and his suit to produce thunder and lightning, which allowed him to appear godlike. However, in the end, we learned that Thorleif Goldman really was Thor Odinson, but had been manipulated into forgetting his true identity more clearly. The character design alone here is enough to make Ultimate Thor one of my favorite things about this universe. Number 5. Aunt May forgets to knock. Speaking on people walking in on people. Later on in their comic book history, MJ and Peter wouldn't just be friends or even dating, they would actually end up married for quite a long while. However, just because they were married didn't mean that Aunt May always remembered to respect their privacy and knock when they were alone together in a bedroom. Case in point in Web of Spider-Man issue number 50, when she decides to bring them up some warm hot cocoa to warm their bones on a cold winter's night, only to find out that they are already busy warming their bones.
Number 4. Miles getting Gwen's hair stuck on his hand. If you haven't seen the totally awesome and award-winning animated Into the Spider-Verse film, well, pause this video and go do that and then come back. But if you have, then you surely remember the scene not too long after Miles Morales discovers he has powers and winds up in an extremely embarrassing situation with Gwen Stacy, his crush. You see, Miles' uncle told him to try this totally slick move on his crush where he puts his hand on her shoulder and be like, hey. Which, I don't know where you go after you say the hey thing. It kind of feels like terrible advice, and I think it was because Miles just did it in the middle of a conversation and made it really bad. But then, thanks to his new powers, when he goes to remove his hand, he accidentally gets stuck to her hair. The next 30 seconds sees him accidentally pull her in close, get stuck to her textbook, spin around, blame it on puberty, and then get catapulted by her, all in front of other students. She ends up getting half her hair buzzed off, which, hey, it's an experience neither of them will forget. Maybe when they're married they'll laugh about it, I don't know, maybe not.
Number 3. Spider-Man loses control. One of the most awkward moments in terms of just what went down has to be when Spider-Man accidentally hits MJ when she's trying to get between Peter and his clone Ben Reilly to stop them from fighting one another. Oddly enough, I was remembering a thing where this also appeared. Even though this moment was very different in terms of what caused it to happen, a very similar incident also is incorporated into the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film franchise. In this case, MJ tries to stop Peter from beating up on a bouncer at the nightclub that she works at. In the comics, Peter and Ben both go to run some tests to figure out who is the clone and who is the original between them, when Peter learns that Ben is supposedly the original, and he freaks out. He begins wailing on Ben, and Mary Jane breaks free to attempt to break up the fight, calling out to her husband, "Stop it, Peter, for the love of God! Stop, you're killing him!" Instinctively, Peter goes to push MJ back, telling her to get away and leave him alone, and he strikes her, sending her flying with his super strength, only for him to realize what he's done almost immediately, condemning his own behavior before running away. In Spider-Man 3, it goes down similarly, with Peter running away even following this encounter, and MJ calling out, "Peter, stop it," which is also very similar.
Number 2. Spider-Web underwear. In The Amazing Spider-Man from 2014, after Spider-Man had a bit of a body swap with a certain villain, he got into a fight that had all of his costume, minus his mask, zapped off. Like, all of it. down to his birthday suit. As a quick solution to the problem, Spider-Man decided to use his webbing to cover up his privates as an honestly genius decision. Well, it would have been genius, but see, Peter didn't realize that the villain he mind swapped with actually improved his webbing so it now lasts much longer, which meant Peter now had some permanent underwear for a while. So not only did Spider-Man have a costume consisting of a mask and web undies that was seen all over live television, prompting many characters to laugh at him, and even gave Jessica Drew a clue that this was Peter Parker back in his body again, he also had to explain this whole thing in one long monologue to Captain America of all people. Oh, Peter, you never cease to amaze.
Number 1. Trapped in Dr. Octopus's mind. At one point in the comics, we get the awesome weirdness that is Superior Spider-Man, which is basically when Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, takes hold of Spider-Man's body. However, this happens as the result of a body swap, which Peter is tricked into, which means that Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, has his consciousness end up in the failing body of Otto Octavius, who at that time was dying. While trapped in Otto's mind, Peter ends up reliving some of Otto's memories, namely an extremely intimate and weirdly romantic moment that happened between Otto and Aunt May when the two were engaged to be married. Although they never ended up married, apparently they still sealed the deal, if you know what I mean. Which means that Peter got a front row seat to an intimate interaction that he'd rather have never known happened. And, you know, he's in Otto's body in that memory, so.
Coming in at number 10 is Injustice. Some of the best Superman stories have to deal with the Man of Steel going to the dark side. Ultraman, Superboy Prime, Superman Red Sun, all fantastic takes on the character, but, and this is an arguable point, the darkest and most shocking of these is Injustice. Sure, Injustice is based off the Mortal Kombat-like video game, but it's just dark from the get-go. Thanks to the Joker, Superman is tricked into taking the life of both Lois Lane and their future. He then plunges his hand straight through the Joker's chest, just cementing the fact that he has gone overboard. But if that weren't enough, it's the way he dispatches the heroes who used to be his friends that will really get you. Burning Martian Manhunter alive and using his heat vision on Shazam's eyeballs are just two of the worst ones for me. Number 9. Frank Miller's work. Frank Miller wrote the groundbreaking comic The Dark Knight Returns in 1986. And it was truly something. While it was dark, it just offered up an amazing story and some crazy awesome scenes that people never knew they wanted. But it hurts a lot to say that its success unfortunately led to sequels. These sequels dropped in quality, both in storytelling and especially in art, but they ramped up the insanity. We had a Robin who had been completely neglected by Batman and went absolutely insane, and in another moment Wonder Woman and Superman end countless lives while they do the deed. Now, there is nothing wrong with superheroes becoming romantically involved. It happens all the time, but to have Superman, with his strong moral code, decide that he is going to fly around, crash landing into populated areas, causing earthquakes, hurricanes, and the evacuation of Hawaii, all while wrapped up with Wonder Woman, it's just dumb and really messed up. Number 8. Superboy Prime and Mr. Mixopitalic. I usually pounce on any opportunity to talk about Mr. Mixopitalic, but what happened in Countdown to Final Crisis between him and Superboy Prime? It just ain't it. Honestly, a lot of this 52-issue series is extremely dark. There are lots of lost lives and destruction signifying nothing and mostly ultimately ignored by the Final Crisis. But in Countdown to Final Crisis number 23, Superboy Prime abducts the 5th dimensional imp and takes him back to the source wall. Here, Superboy Prime uses an unreasonable amount of force on Mr. Mixopitalic to find his home. When Mr. Mixopitalic refuses, Superboy Prime uses his laser eyes to carve the Superman symbol into the poor imp's face. If you guys are enjoying this video so far, make sure to drop a like. That's all you gotta do to show us that we don't suck. Okay. Number 7. Arsenal. Justice League Cry for Justice is an honestly fantastic story, but it does Red Arrow bad. In one moment, the super genius criminal Prometheus lands a right hook on Red Arrow that was so hard, Arrow's right arm detached from his shoulder. This was bad enough, but Prometheus also orchestrated the events that led to the passing of Red Arrow's daughter, Lian. After these events, he became Arsenal, got a cybernetic arm, and also fell back into a substance problem that he had. One time, under the influence of the stuff, he thought he was protecting his daughter from 5 versions of the villain Prometheus, but in reality, he was just beating up some random people in an alleyway, and his daughter was actually a no longer alive stray cat. Batman showed up to beat some sense into Arsenal, but the damage was done to both Arsenal's psyche and readers' memories. Number 6. The Woman in the Refrigerator. Green Lantern stories aren't usually known for their darkness, but in Green Lantern Volume 3, number 54 from 1994, Kyle Rayner came home one day and found that his girlfriend, Alexandra DeWitt, had been extremely ruthlessly removed from life by the supervillain Major Force and then stuffed into their refrigerator. Kyle, sufficiently motivated by anger and regret, ended up stopping the bad guy, but some people have had enough. Specifically, DC writer Gail Simone. Gail, fueled by the image of seeing her favorite female character done so wrong, coined the term women in the refrigerators as a way to refer to comic book women who have been de-lifed and or had their entire lives ruined, specifically in order to fuel the stories of superhero men. There are tons of other examples in comics of this happening, but this one may be the worst, hence the term. Number 5. Lack of Sabretooth. Sabretooth has always been a pretty terrifying dude. He ain't nice, he's extremely violent and extremely hard to bring down. And even more so in the Ultimate Universe, he becomes bonded with adamantium similar to Wolverine and even has retractable bone claws out of his forearms. Also like Wolverine. Doesn't really need them, as he also eventually has his naturally occurring claws on each fingertip as well as his fangs and teeth laced with adamantium to just bump up the amount of absolutely bloody carnage he can produce. If this sounds awesomely terrifying, it's because it is, which makes it a shame when he doesn't really do much. Sabretooth in the Ultimate Universe, similar to 616, is kind of just a lackey to Weapon X and then later to Magneto. It just feels wrong to make such an imposing villain more imposing but not give him much to do. Number 4. Sabretooth versus Angel. Oh, actually, there is one thing of note here that Sabretooth does. One thing that was incredibly brutal and unnecessary in true Ultimate Universe fashion. In the aftermath of Magneto's Ultimatum wave, he and Sabretooth waited in the Arctic for the heroes to come and try to apprehend them in Ultimatum issue number 4 from 2009. The first to arrive was Warren Worthington III, or Angel, who came crashing through a window with a punch straight to Magneto's big old face. But after Magneto gave the go-ahead, Sabretooth pounced at the crash-landed mutant, scratching the living hell out of his back, tore off one of his wings with his teeth, seeming to enjoy the brief cannibalism, and then stomped on Warren's neck with his boot, taking out the mutant in another of the Ultimate Universe's unceremonious dispatching of a fan-loved character. Thanks, Ultimate Universe! Thank you so much. Number 3. Dormammu and Doctor Strange. Speaking of unceremonious dispatching, Angel wasn't the only hero to meet his end in issue number 4 of Ultimatum. Right at the beginning of the comic, it seems that the Hulk's rampaging has led to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, and he begins just smashing everything, including magical items, which results in a blinding flash of light. Next thing we know, the dread Dormammu is free from the dark dimension and is in magical conflict with Doctor Strange. But Dormammu seems more than confident that he won't be defeated by the Sorcerer. It takes merely a few pages before Dormammu uses the Sorcerer Supreme's own sash, belt, cloak thingy, constricting it around Strange's body so tightly that it explodes his head in an extremely grotesque couple of panels that I'm not sure we're even allowed to show. Just like that, the normally extremely powerful Dr. Stephen Strange is out of the picture. Number 2. Hawkeye's family tragedy. Say what you will about the ultimate version of Clint Barton. He is much less heroic than his 616 counterpart, he is a S.H.I.E.L.D. sponsored killer, and he is much more of a secret agent. Ultimately, he is the basis for the MCU's version of the character, from his look to his family. But what the Ultimate Universe did to his family, or more specifically what Black Widow did to them, I should say, will likely never be seen in the MCU, which we should all thank our lucky stars for. As we talked about all the way up at the 10th point, Natalia Romanova did not turn out to be a great gal. She was working for the Liberators, a group of heroes from around the globe who were opposed to the amount of power held by the United States thanks to S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Ultimates. It was a cool, realistic concept, and one that could have opened up the comics to more worldwide inclusiveness. Instead, it was kind of just a way to make America seem superior. After Natalia's revelation as a traitor, she organized the assassination of her longtime Black Ops partner Hawkeye's entire family, even personally taking out his son Callum. For her crimes, Clint does put an arrow between her eyes in Ultimates 2's final chapter, as she is in a hospital bed thanks to Tony Stark giving her brain damage. It doesn't really help the whole situation. And in at number 1, Peter Parker comes back to life. One of the key things about the Ultimate Universe was supposed to be its realism, or at least its realism in a universe full of superheroes, sorcerers, gods, and monsters. One of the aspects of said realism was the fact that death would be permanent, which is about as real as you can get. The only problem was that didn't seem to last. One of the best things about the Ultimate Universe was Ultimate Spider-Man. It's regarded as not only the best thing out of that universe, but one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told. His eventual death after saving many people in Ultimatum, taking a bullet for Captain America, and then fighting and defeating Norman Osborn and the Six was equally as amazing, if not tragic and emotional. It also paved the way for another one of the Ultimate Universe's best, Miles Morales. So in order to make that amazing story and all the emotional weight it had going for it mean absolutely nothing, what do you know? Peter Parker wakes up in some underground laboratory, seemingly revived. Yay! Number 10, Thor and Hela. Starting off with an example of why the Ultimate Universe does some unnecessary stuff from time to time, Thor was forced to kill his supervillain's son to save America from civil war. But what's funny, well not funny, is that wasn't even the unnecessary part. So it begins in the aftermath of an event called Ultimatum, which we will get to much later on. Basically, Ultimate Thor ends up sacrificing his own life to save his lover, Valkyrie. While in the afterlife, in order to be reunited with and save Valkyrie, the goddess Hela makes Thor fight a whole army of undead soldiers, which he does. But then Thor asks what else he needs to do, and this goddess just starts undressing herself and demanding that Thor gives her a baby, which of course he does, and it doesn't even save Valkyrie. This comes back later with the child, Modi Thor's son, being raised by a much more villainous Loki, feeling abandoned and seeking revenge, trying to turn America into a new Asgard while wielding an Infinity Stone and forcing Thor to eventually strike down his own evil son. Number 9. Look what they did to my boy! Almost everyone loves Deadpool. Weirdly, even some moms love Deadpool. So when the gritty, realistic, mature Ultimate Universe was going to bring the character in, you'd expect it to be a match made in heaven. No! I blame this version of the character for the monstrosity we got 3 years later in 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. The Ultimate Marvel version of Deadpool was a sergeant in the military named Wade Wilson. He's grim, he's angry, he's way too serious, and he also is an incredibly racist mutant hater. Oh, he was also a cyborg with incredible strength, he retained his signature healing factor, and instead of just being disfigured, he had no skin at all. And he's missing part of his skull, so his head is instead encased in a clear plastic case for everyone to see. Deadpool leads the Reavers, who are also racist, in trying to kill prominent mutants. Thankfully, Ultimate Deadpool was taken off the board by the 616 Deadpool in Deadpool Kills Deadpool in 2013. Number 8. Hank Pym needs to chill. Hank Pym has not really ever been that great of a dude. He has multiple untreated mental disorders and crazy insecurities that have caused him to do multiple not so great things in his time in the regular universe. But of course, everything in the Ultimate Universe gets ramped up a bit. Pym got involved in a very heated argument with his wife, Janet Van Dyne, over her friendship with Captain America. In Ultimates issue number 6, things start to get physical until the Wasp shrinks down to her smaller size to get away from her husband. Unfortunately, the terribly insecure Hank cornered her and sprayed her wasp-sized self with bug spray. She hid under a desk to catch her breath after inhaling the toxic fumes, while her husband just kept on with the emotional bombardment. But he didn't stop there. He then sent an army of ants after her until he realized what he was doing to his own wife. This stuff kind of boils my blood just a little bit. The fight resulted in Janet's very near death, her hospitalization, and his expulsion from the Ultimates. Number 7. Making the Maker. The Fantastic Four in the Ultimate Universe remained relatively the same, at least in their family dynamics. Their backstory was slightly modified, but overall the four main heroes lived as you'd expect, until it all went Marvel Ultimate-y. First off, Sue Storm and Reed Richards lost a child together, but then Reed Richards proposed to Susan Storm and she rejected his proposal. Just like that, the Fantastic Four was no more, but that's not the end. What came next, really quickly I might add, was Reed going absolutely bonkers, faking his death, de-lifing his family, planning alien terror plots around the world, being trapped in the negative zone where he primed his intellect by stretching his brain and skull, and he built an army. Since he was horribly burnt by the Human Torch, Reed took to wearing a helmet and founded the Children of Tomorrow, the Dark Ultimates, and he called himself the Maker. He became an incredibly evil Reed Richards. Number 6. Cap hates France? Look, despite the name, Captain America, Steve Rogers, is very much a protector of the world, not just America. So it was really odd when in Ultimates number 12 from Mark Miller, Brian Hitch, and Paul Neary, we see the Ultimate Marvel Universe Captain America verbally wailing on France, of all places. Captain America is caught in a fight with Herr Kleiser, an old German rival. Just for better context, Nick Fury is there too. Captain America is obviously the hero though, so eventually he gets the upper hand. It was just so odd that when Kleiser was pinned by Cap and asking for surrender, well, Cap digs his shield into the dude's stomach and says, "Surrender? Surrender? You think this letter on my head stands for France?" The comment was kind of fueled by the time period it was written in, as the states were entering into a war and France refused to join them, leading to some anti-France feelings in the real world. But this World War II era dig at the country left a bad taste in pretty much everyone's mouth, especially from a character that is supposed to be much better than that. Number 5. Sentry and Aries. The Sentry is a character that deserves more light. The problem is he is kind of the most powerful superhero Marvel has. Obviously that's debatable, but this guy has the power to destroy pretty much anybody in the Marvel universe. For example, he has reassembled his own molecules and taken out the Molecule Man. But it's the fight between the Sentry and Aries, the literal god of war, in issue 2 of Siege that really left me sitting there going, did that actually just happen? Through the course of the story, Aries has been showing just how awesome he is, and he turns his sights on Norman Osborn, which unfortunately means Aries now has to face his friend, the Sentry. Sentry punches Aries halfway across Asgard, and maybe 2 or 3 punches later, he grabs both ends of the God of War and rips him completely in half. Not only did it leave everyone on the page frozen, it also left readers completely stunned. Number 4. The Hulk and Tigra. In 1995, Marvel released The Last Avengers Story, and with a title like that, from 1995, you can imagine it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Side note, the art in this comic is actually really good, which actually made it worse watching this version of the Incredible Hulk turn against his fellow Avengers, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, Mockingbird, and Tigra. Tigra against the Hulk is not a fight you would normally expect, and this Hulk tells you why, as in her attack against the Green Goliath, Hulk simply grabs her and pulls her apart just like Sentry did with Ares. Number 3. The Punisher. The Punisher could probably make up almost every single spot on this list, but that wouldn't make a very compelling collection of horrible moments, now would it? No. So, I'm going to pick just one. Punisher, being a regular guy, has to come up with some pretty inventive ways of dispatching criminals and super criminals. Usually that involves weaponry, but he's tossed a guy to a great white shark, or to the wolves in a zoo, he's disintegrated the Hulk with magic, and even smothered a guy with a much larger guy. A close second is when he took down the Wolverine by parking a steamroller on top of him, but number 1 would have to be when he faced the entire Marvel universe. In this alternate world, it's a superhero battle, not crime, that brings a close to his family. Because of that, Frank Castle took down everyone. It's the final fight with Daredevil though that really hits. It's a slogfest, and Frank doesn't realize what he's done till Matt Murdock pulls off his mask before he passes on, which prompts Frank to turn on himself, leaving us readers feeling completely distraught. Number 2. Ultimatum. The Marvel Ultimate Universe. An ultimate collection of bizarre choices, really. Chief among them would have to be the event that was supposed to bring the universe to an end, but instead just did a whole bunch of really brutal stuff. And then it just kinda carries on. I'm talking about Ultimatum. In this event, Magneto, lacking any of his 616 universe counterpart's moral compass, flips the magnetic poles of the Earth. Now this causes incredibly bad weather, tidal waves, and the de-lifing of millions of people. But if that wasn't bad enough, in the ensuing chaos caused by the Ultimatum wave, the Blob devours Janet Van Dyne, Hank Pym in his giant form chomps the Blob's head off for revenge, Captain America ends up on life support, Thor trades his life and soul for Valkyries in the Land of the Dead, Magneto uses Iron Man's and Cyclops' power to brutally obliterate Wolverine, and then Magneto screams and raves until Cyclops blows his head off with an I-beam. It was all just a lot. And in at number 1 is Marvel Ruins. If you know Marvel Ruins, then you had to know that this was going to be number 1. This is a story taking place in an alternate comic book universe where literally everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Similar to Ultimatum, it's just kinda best to list off the events rather than get specific here. The Fantastic Four's spacecraft crashes into Earth and Ben Grimm is left with survivor's guilt. The Incredible Hulk is not so incredible as the gamma radiation he experienced leaves him as a hulking mass of tumors and deformity. Thanks to the radioactive spider, Spider-Man did not gain the abilities of a spider, but instead developed an incredibly brutal mutant virus that left him with a terrible skin rash and had him captured and quarantined by the government. The Scarlet Witch betrayed the Avengers to the government, leading to the Quinjet being blown up with them all inside of it. Nick Fury was introduced to the idea of eating other people by Captain America, Silver Surfer suffocated in space, Johnny Blaze sets himself on fire as a stunt and goes out in the same stunt, and Magneto's powers go out of control in an airport. The whole story just leaves you wondering what you're supposed to do with your life now.